So can I start with just asking you, who are you? Tricky.
What kind of answer do you want?
Oh, come on. It's your job now.
This is going to be so much work.
Okay, so let's begin with a little bit of bio.
Yeah, okay, sure. So I was born in London.
When?
In 1965, September the 5th, 1965.
Virgo.
Virgo, absolutely, yeah. And
love for the details.
my father was from Libya, and kind of a refugee. He was in camps in the Holocaust.
Was he?
Yeah, in Belgium. And
how come?
It's a long story. So let's start right in. It's a long story. So what I understand is that Libya traded, it was an Italian colony for a long time. And then the Second World War broke out, and my grandfather, my father's father, had the idea that if he traced his ancestry back to Gibraltar, which was a British colony 6 or 7 generations before, to Gibraltar, then he could claim British citizenship, not Libyan and therefore Italian. And in that way, his sons would be free of being drafted into the Italian army, so they would be safe. That was his idea.
Okay.
So he did this, and then the Second World War broke out, but then they were immediately put in prison as prisoners of war by the Italians.
Wrong time.
It backfired.
Wow.
But then even worse, I think I have the story right, even worse, so they were prisoners of war. It was okay. In Libya, the Italians were very casual, they weren't like the Nazis, you know.
Yeah.
So, but then somehow they got transported to Italy, still as prisoners of war, not as Jews, as British citizens. And somehow in the transportation, they crossed paths kind of accidentally with some Germans who found out they were Jewish and separated them and took them to Belgium. So he was in Bergen-Belsen. He was in a series of camps, and that was one of them. And
how old was he?
He was a teenager, but I don't think he really even knew exactly what year he was born. You know, he's from a different culture, a different generation. Well, he's dead now, but he was a teenager, and so he went with basically the whole family, and they ended up in Belgium, but survived, of course. And
the whole family survived.
Most of them.
Wow,
yeah.
That's
he was.
big.
I mean, he almost didn't make it, but yeah. So it's a complicated story, and but it was. I grew up with that. You know, I grew up with that like intense. You couldn't. You know, it was just always around. It was like in the air. It was in the psyche and stuff. So I grew up with that sort of sense of that massive, you know, huge, and it was something I was always really interested in. Actually, I kind of wanted to. I had a difficult relationship with my father. Really, just like that. You know, we were very different in a lot of ways, and he was really scarred from the war, really traumatized. But I was something about that I wanted to I didn't have the language for it at the time, or even the self-consciousness, but I really wanted to open my heart to it. I wanted to open my psyche to that sort of enormous suffering, not just his, but just the totality of it, you know, what humanity is capable of, and that sort of thing. And I don't know that the same was true, let's say, of my brother or sister. So I had this funny, strange kind of intuitive relationship with it, and I really, you know, it was there around. Sometimes he would talk about it more, you know, usually when he was upset, and he would talk about it.
Really? Like what would you say?
Well, different things. So if he was angry, he would use it as a, you know, like, I didn't. Yeah. But other times, so say he'd been upset about something, and then he was coming out the other end. So he had a terrible temper, rage, and awful, you know, and really a bit crazy, really, to be honest, you know. And but then so it was upset, and then he was kind of coming out the other end, maybe even some weeks later, and something was softening in his heart. And then sometimes he would just talk, and he would tell stories about the camps and things like this. And I just really wanted to drink it in. There was something in me that I just, I don't know, just like a sponge, And I think he maybe, again, probably didn't compute, conceptually, consciously, but I think he sensed that. And so he would talk and I would listen, and sometimes we would talk for hours, and kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So I grew up with that, and it was really it was just infused. It was in the walls. It was in the air in the house, and in my childhood, and the other kids. I grew up in London. No one else around really had that history because they were second, third generation, fourth generation immigrants, and so I was kind of, it's like I had knowledge and access of this thing. That probably until my friends were, teenagers, they didn't even hear about or didn't know anything. Yes. And I remember the headmaster in the school one time saying something like, "I hope you have never heard of this and never have to hear of it again." And he started talking about the Holocaust. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I was like 7 or something. It's like, wow. It was my, it was the air I breathed.
You mean like terrible stories?
From my father?
Yes.
A mixture of funny stories, terrible stories, miraculous stories. Really? His father, my grandfather, was a Kabbalist, and I didn't speak. So he must have died. When did he die? I don't know, but I was young. So we used to go. They stayed in Libya. They went back to Libya after the war. My father got fed up with Libya because it was also very anti-Semitic, violently anti-Semitic. So he just said, "I can't."
In our country.
Yeah. So, but they were integrated Jews before, and then, but then they went back after the war, and it was really, really violent. This is what I heard. And my father just wanted to get out, so he came with his British citizenship that we got in this trouble in the first place. He came to London, but the others stayed, and then Gaddafi came with a coup. And in one night, suddenly they were in really, really danger. So they hid in their house. The rest of this is 1967. Yeah. They hid in the house, and someone smuggled them out of the house in the middle of the night. And they came to our house in London, like this extended family of Libyans.
You never met?
I had been there. I had been there when I was like 1. I don't remember nothing. This is all story. I don't remember. So I show you a picture of my grandmother. She's like a, Libyan, the dress and just a completely different, culture. Anyway, so they came, they camped out in our house, this small house in London. Yeah, there was, I don't know how many of them. And they'd literally escaped in the middle of the night, and they stayed, I don't know, a few months or something in our house. And then some went to Israel, some went to Italy.
So you have relatives in Israel?
Many, whose names I don't even know anymore. So many.
Wow.
If you Burbea. Burbea or Burbea. You look it in a phone book or something, if they have phone books or something. They probably ever had Holon and Tel Aviv and Netanya and One time I was in Israel as a teenager, and I was looking for my aunt. I think it was in Holon, but I don't remember. And I was completely lost and trying to find this woman. I went to a bus stop, and there was an old woman there, and I asked her, I'm looking for my pidgin Hebrew. I asked her, and I looked at her, and I saw in her eyes I recognized in her eyes it was my aunt. But I could tell even before there was something in the eyes. I recognized my father and my kind of the family soul in her eyes. So that was interesting. But
that was amazing. How did she?
I can't remember exactly how it unfolded, but she was very close to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my father's grandfather, my grandfather, he was a Kabbalist. Yeah, and I think he was a rabbi. I'm not sure. So I never really got to communicate with him because I didn't speak Arabic or Ladino.
I was going to ask, what did they speak?
They spoke Ladino and Arabic and Hebrew and Italian. And then my father and his brother spoke very good English, which I don't quite know where they learned, but or when they learned it. But he didn't, and nor did my grandmother. So I had no way of communicating with him. He was just this guy. He was into his Kabbalistic study and stuff, and I have a good memory from him, and a kind of visual of him. But I couldn't really communicate with him. So my father tells stories about him and stuff that happened around him that's kind of miraculous, and I don't know how much it's true or not, but he's a kind of soul figure for me.
Do you remember one story?
Okay.
That you want to share?
Yeah, there's maybe a couple. So my father was really ill in Belgium. He says, and again, I don't know if this is true, but he says he was the one person who ever went into the hospital in Belgium and came out alive.
It makes sense.
Well, that's actually true, but he was in hospital. He had typhoid or something like that, and so he was really, really weak. And so he came out of the hospital. He was on crutches. He's a teenager, very weak. And there was this woman. I don't know if you've heard of her, Irma Grieser. Have you heard of her? Irma Grieser. No, she. If I remember, I think that's the name. She was a Nazi SS officer in Belgium, notorious for her sadism. So she was there. And my father was there just very weak with crutches and with hanging out, I think, with a few people, including his father, my grandfather, and I think his brother, his older uncle who just died, aged 94 or something in Rome, and so they're standing around and they see Irma Grieser, and she comes towards them. And my grandfather took the crutches from my father. He just grabbed the crutches and he put them as if he was the guy who was really weak. She came over and she started, kind of picking on him because he was obviously the weakest one. And then she pushed him, and they were on near a slope, and she pushed him, my grandfather, and he fell and tumbled like this, and she found that hilarious. So she's like, laughing like this, but that satisfied her. So he tumbled like this. And my father said if he'd have fallen like Anne Frank, she died because she fell. She was so weak. It was a shock when you're so ill. Mm-hmm. So he took the fall and he tumbled. She had got humor satisfied or whatever, sadistic humor, and she went away. So my father said if he had kept the crutches, he would have died. So that's not maybe a miraculous story. That's a compassion story. But there were other stuff. I mean, I don't know what to make of this, but it's in the lore. That so he was. They came to him. What's the story? It was something like they were doing some work, intense period work in the camps or something, and they were really being worked too hard, and then they came to my grandfather and they said, "You have to do something because we're going to die." So he said, my father always says when he said these special prayers, he goes into like a trance or something, and I've never heard of this. He ties knots in a handkerchief. Have you heard of this? Yeah, I've never heard. He ties knots in a handkerchief, and then it started snowing, and it just snowed and snowed and snowed, so they couldn't do any work. So they all got some respite. But, I mean, these are the kinds of but that's the kind of story. So I kind of, like I said, I didn't know him, but I grew up with this sense.
And when he came over, how did he?
Well, I was so young, So we used to go every year. We used to drive 3 days of complete family madness in the car from London to Rome to see the family. Which actually I say that, but actually it was a great adventure, to drive like that. And so we went every summer, I think till I was about 9, to spend time with my father's parents and his siblings and their families and so in Rome. And so I knew him like that, but I didn't, we couldn't speak to each other. And at that time I had no interest in anything spiritual, nothing whatsoever. I was just into football and whatever. So
things going.
Yeah, absolutely. And so things like that. And then one more thing. Yeah. So he was like this. I mean, this is all hearsay because I didn't really know him. So, but my father, after the war, became an adamant atheist. Like he just said, it doesn't make any sense. Like this is complete rubbish. And so he went that way. And then at some point, I think when he met my mum, who is English, she's 84. She's English. She wasn't Jewish. No. So they started, and somewhere in their courting before they were married, he decided, okay, I want to get married and have a family, But then he decided, so I want you to convert and become Orthodox. Convert Orthodox. You know, it's a lot. Yeah. It's quite a project. So yeah, so she did that, and then he became religious after this period of like atheism. Wow. But I always felt I never felt like his religiosity was very deep. It was a very fear-based thing, and a very identity-based thing, and a very rule-based. You know, so I had this grandfather who I heard about, and later became kind of more of a soul figure, like an image figure to me, with this very deep sort of spirituality, and then a father where it was very oppressive and really kind of, it was really strict in our house. You know, I couldn't play football for the school team on Saturday, so I used to sneak out, and it was crazy. You know, all this madness, and so it was a kind of brittle, fearful, very contracted and kind of oppressive, my sense of it as growing up. You know, it didn't kind of translate whatever it was, and yeah, who knows why, whatever. But so it was very different sense.
So you actually grew up in this Orthodox religious.
Yeah, I grew up as Orthodox religious Jewish background, but my father was Sephardic because he's from Libya. But there wasn't really a Sephardic culture in London, so.
Ashkenazi.
Yeah, it was all Ashkenazi, and so in many ways I felt like an odd one out. I felt like an odd one out for being Jewish. I felt like an odd one out also because my father was very dark. He looked like he was from Pakistan or India.
Oh,
yeah, but dark Arab. Yeah, and so people, and somehow we didn't get that. And my mum's very pale, and so we inherited more of that. But people would, you know, be racist towards him and stuff, and so we had the Jewish thing. We had this kind of racist sort of mixed culture thing that was really ugly, you know, and then within the Jewish thing, I also felt like it wasn't quite because we were Sephardic. Yeah. So but I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish house. Everything was really like this, you know, and
second generation, which is
Holocaust. It was very intense with that. Yeah, and then my mom was converted from this very sort of English sensibility and culture.
Why did she do it? Like she wanted to, or you persuaded her into it? She didn't mind, or I mean, it's quite a thing to do when someone.
I wouldn't like to. I could guess, but I wouldn't like to. You know, also because she's still living. So, I don't know. You can ask her.
Maybe I'll get a chance.
So it was intense. It was like a very intense place. You know, very intense vibe to grow up in, but it was Orthodox and really strict. And for a period I was into it, you know, when I was kind of young.
Like in what way?
Like I used to, you know, I could read without the vowels. I could, you know, learn and sing. I knew the services off by heart. I knew all this stuff. Yeah, you know, I was saturated in that. We had a really, you know, strict Jewish education. I just, at a certain age, I took to it, and then at some point, just like, no. Probably when I was like 13 or 14, and then I was a very adamant atheist and science and all this stuff, and then.
But you did your bar mitzvah.
Oh, I did my bar mitzvah. Believe me, I did my bar mitzvah. I did the whole thing.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
This one about war.
About war. It's all about war. Yeah, it's interesting.
Not all of it. Some of it is nice.
I forgot it's about prostitution. I think some of it as well. You know it well.
I just understand Hebrew. I don't know it.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, a lot of it's about, I can't remember now. But yeah, so for a period I was into it, and I did that, and I was saturated in that culture, and I took to it, you know, at a certain age, and then I really rejected it. And then there was this battle with my father about it. But the other thing about him, is this okay? Or
That's great.
Okay, so the other thing, he couldn't, you know, when so late 13, 14, just very kind of into science and logic and this kind of thing, and I think my brain develops at that age and all this stuff. So and then at a certain age, it was probably around 16, 17, and I really, I don't know if it was my first love and then being rejected by her, and then I don't know if this triggered something, and I spent a lot of time on my own, like in the year. It was around 16, 17, and a lot of time in nature, and something just in my consciousness, you know, like it really, a whole other sensibility to music and to nature and to some kind of spiritual sense that I didn't really have. So I was just, something really happened over the period of about a year. It was very, again, really intense, but I'm really thankful for it, you know. So I really got into music. It was so important for me, and I started playing.
What did you play?
I started playing guitar. My father had, he, telling you too many things at once, but he was really into music. My mum played piano fairly well, and so they started us very early age at piano, and I hated it. So I did it for like a year, and then I think I managed to get out. And then later they said I could start again violin, which is actually what my father wanted to play. And he said in the camps there was a Jewish violinist, and he just was totally taken with this. You know? Really? In Belgium? You have a relative in Belgium? Or in the Vermont?
Yeah,
really?
he was a musician. That's how he survived, and he played just about everything. That's how he survived.
Every instrument.
Yes,
wow.
He was this genius. And I mean, I don't know the story really well, and I don't know where he was, but probably also there.
What country was he?
Poland.
Oh. Wow. Yeah, so maybe, who knows? But I think that was a thing the Nazis did, the SS did, they took these musicians, you know. Right. So there was someone or a few people in the camps that really made an impression on my father with the violin. So he really wanted to learn the violin, but anyway, so he made me learn the violin. He didn't at that age. And so I hated that as well. And I really wasn't, I did it, I think, for a year or two. But then something happened like when I was 16 or 17, and I really got into music, and I got into classical guitar, and also I was really into Hendrix and different things. And but I studied classical guitar very seriously.
Oh,
did you? Sorry. At the same age, or?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And yeah, I just saw this. There was this program. It's called BBC Young Musician of the Year. It was like a competition for these young, and I saw this young guy.
You went there.
Oh, what's that?
No,
it was on TV. I just saw him play this guitar concerto, and I want to do that. It was just so clear. Yeah. And so I started. Yeah. Anyway, so when I took up guitar, it was because I wanted to do it. And I just really loved it. Yeah.
Can I just go back a bit and ask you? You're the oldest?
I'm the middle. So I have an older sister, a year and a half older, and a younger brother, a year and a half younger. So there's three of us in the middle. Sandwich, but also the oldest male, which I think in that, with my father, and he'd never finished school because of the war, and he had this kind of refugee mentality, around food and around money and saving. So it was really, so he saved all his money and sent us to as good school as we could go, So, but there was so much pressure on us, and I was, I kind of achieved academically, but for my brother and sister, it was really heavy. It wasn't their thing, and so it was. But
it was like a mix for you because you also were so drawn to music. And then...
Yeah, well, that was a little late. Yeah, I got really drawn to music, so my father there was so much pressure academically and to achieve, and I didn't really get liberated from that until after I started at university. So in other words, I followed that trajectory, and I was kind of, I was I would play up at school. I was a bad boy.
I can't imagine you.
I was. It's like something in me played it, so I could be that, but I always did well academically. Yeah. So it wasn't. It was so much pressure. All this Holocaust stuff, and it's like
to excel,
to excel and make sure you're going to achieve and you're going to finish your education. Be someone. That was the thing. Be someone. Yeah. This person, and if there was any indication that wasn't, it's like. Look at him. He is somebody. He's made it. And this heavy... Did you have the same thing?
Singing the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, okay. So it took me until I was like 20... I went to university. I went to Oxford and all this stuff. It was all what he wanted to do, for me. Yeah. But then after that, then I said, that's it. Now I'm going to study music. I have very little money. there's a school in America and I can get a place there. I went to Berkeley to study jazz. I was by that time into jazz.
Wow.
And I told my father, and it was terrible. You know, he just completely didn't speak to me. But at that point, I don't care about this. It took me that long to kind of.
How old were you?
21, I think.
Wow, that's pretty young to stand against your father in that way. It's pretty young. Maybe
it was so strong in me, but it was really difficult. You know, so I had a very difficult relation. It was very oppressive. But he wrote to me. You know, after I was studying for my final exams in psychology, actually, and then
in Berkeley or
no, in Oxford in psychology, and then
you majored in psychology.
I started doing physics, and then I got a place doing physics. I was really into physics. I was really into like finding the unified field theory and the ultimate, you know, and it was a really mystical thing. And actually, then I went to India in between for a couple of months, and I just got much more interested in mind. I think I was young. It was before I was practicing and everything.
Just for a trip to India.
Yeah,
wow.
With a friend, and so I was there for a while. I got very ill, but really I'd smoked too much. You know, took too much. I wasn't really into practice at all. But I got really interested in the mind, you know, and
India does that.
Yeah. And so I got back, and I somehow I couldn't completely give myself to physics, like that whole project. So I tried to change psychology. My father flipped out. So I was still in Oxford.
From physics to psychology.
Yeah, still in Oxford, and he was just like, "This is." He wanted me to be like a physics professor and all this stuff.
I just know it all too well.
Really.
Same.
Yeah. So he freaked out.
Different theme, same music.
It's so interesting. So I stayed in Oxford. I finished my degree. As soon as I was finished, or even before I was finished, I told him, this is what I'm going to do. And he really freaked out this time. It was terrible.
After you put so much into your money,
exactly.
The whole trip that's played on you.
So
but you were strong.
I was strong, but it was like I had such a visceral force in me. That kind of, visceral is like guts, like it was really physical, you know. This kind of something wanted to express, and and musically, and I still have that, you know, not necessarily just in music, but it's in everything. It's like even the Dharma teaching. It's like that something wanted to come through, and I felt it so strongly, and I didn't care about money, and I don't care if I don't care, you know. It's just I have to do this.
Yeah.
And it was, but it was terrible. It was just awful with him. But I went, you know, and I had enough money, I think, for 6 months or something.
How did you scrape it? Like, how did you do it? How did you make it? I mean, 21, going to the States, getting admitted
it's
to
a
Berkeley.
long story. So, which bit? How did I do?
I mean, the whole thing, just in a few lines.
I think psychically, it was just that by that time, something had been happening for really quite a few years. I had started practicing by that point as well. I started when I was like 18 or 19 in Oxford, and really took to that as well. Got really into it straight from the beginning. But something had been happening for a while, just in terms of like what I knew in my soul, in my body, my whole being was most important to me. You know, these things about something wanting to express things that came through, and art and music and creativity and spirituality, and it was just people were saying all kinds of things, you know. Other people said, "You're crazy." It wasn't like I was a virtuoso or anything. I was really a beginner, you know. People say, "You're completely mad. What are you doing?" And I just had this
because you wanted it so much. Or
why were they saying that? Or
why were they saying it so much?
Because you look at me, and it wasn't like I had just like. Super excelled, achieved academically, and then physics, and then psychology, and all this stuff. And then I looked at people like, I'm throwing that away for something that's like, it's not like I was an obvious musical talent or anything like that. It was really kind of a beginner. So it was a huge risk, you know. But I just trusted the love I had. You know, I had so much love, and I knew that was more important than talent, whatever that means. If you have enough love for something, it's like you find a way to make things work, and you know what I'm saying. So that's, I just trusted that, and how I knew that, I don't know. But there was a I remember, you know, at 17, 18, there was force, like in my body, almost to express. And it was like I couldn't express. I wasn't capable musically. I didn't. So it was like almost this frustrated, pent-up thing, and it was hard in a lot of ways. And even then, in music school, being at the bottom of the pile, it was hard.
First time ever, probably.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It was, yeah.
But you were on fire.
I was completely on fire. But I would take my guitar to the school. I was so happy to be doing music. It was like a liberation. I'm like finally doing what I want to be doing. All I was doing was music, and away from the whole craziness of the family and in a different country. And but it was hard. I used to go. I was at the bottom of the pile, and there were people at that college. Especially there were people coming from Europe who. And also US, they don't need
their lives.
And they had scholarships. All they needed was an entry to get a US visa, so they could make connections. They didn't need the school, so they were like already like maestros, Yeah. So I would take my guitar and I would go to school, and I was like drag. I would feel it was so hard. It was so painful. I wanted it so much, and it was like I was really just beginning. I mean, comparing myself, it was really painful. And wonderful to be doing music, yeah. So anyway, so I had money for 6 months. My father, they came over to. I wanted to go completely on my own. They said, "No, we're coming with you. Make sure you find an apartment." So they came. He was already. I say this with a little kindness. He was. I think he was a little crazy. Okay, but on this trip, when they were like helping me. Find an apartment and cheap furniture and whatever. He got even weirder. So it was like really, really bizarre. And we were like fighting, and I almost punched him, and then they left me, and they were going to go, I think, to California or something for like a few days, and then come back and say goodbye. And he really didn't want me to be there at all. So that was part of the real. Yeah. But he said, "Okay, you can do it for 6 months or a year, and then
go back."
So I was like, "Okay, sure." And I was like,
"No." Back.
But then on that trip, so they went to California, and in the airport, he had a brain seizure, and he collapsed, and they found a brain tumor, and he was completely disoriented. And in the hospital bed, he was very confused. But he said, "Don't worry, I'll pay for the music school." So everything kind of softened in that. So crazy, just mad.
Sometimes this craziness. I mean, I have no clue what was there, but. Oftentimes it happens that a brain tumor actually causes it. Yeah,
because that's what I was wondering. The doctor said that it might have been there for 15 years. Yes. So it was a benign tumor and a very slow growing one and pressing on his brain. So it did occur to me. So how much was from the war and the Holocaust and the trauma of the camps? How much was just how he was, and how much was from this brain thing?
Quantities are irrelevant. It's like all in the mix.
But it's certainly possible. Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, then he said that, so I could, in this crazy situation, he thought he was going to die. You see, in the hospital, I had a sense that he wasn't, but he thought he was going to die.
So sweet of him to actually come
and
meet you when you want to be.
At the end of the day, I know that he really loved me. I had such a hard time with him, but. I can't, I did therapy and whatnot, and I came to a place where I kind of accepted his limitations. So I don't have a problem with him now. I saw what he could give me. It's like I can't really put my word, but there's a lot of peace there, and it feels good. I might have I wish I had a more peaceful childhood, or easier, less intense, or less pressure, But it was what it was, and it's part of my soul,
Exactly. And who knows?
Who knows? So it's part of forging what I am, and I'm grateful for that. Exactly. And so I don't have any lingering anything at all with him. And he thought he was going to die, so he did this. It was very beautiful. So I ended up staying. I mean, I was really had very little money at times, but I could do it. And then he actually died a few years later before I graduated.
And he kept supporting you all the time.
He kept just about, yeah. But basically, I was able to do it, and touch and go. But I was able to do it, and then he died. He died of a heart disease that was undiagnosed. It was just like really suddenly.
But he wasn't like pressing you to live it, or that was the end.
He was. I think his idea was like, you finish this, you grow up a little bit, and then you come back and get a normal job. And this can be a hobby, you know.
Yeah,
that was
parents.
That was his idea. But anyway, things didn't turn out that way, and so weird. You know, I went to America on this thing to study with enough money of my own for a few months, and I ended up staying 15 years.
15.
Yeah.
How when did he die? How old were you?
I was 26 when he died.
Oh.
He was 92, and he died, like I said, very suddenly. Very suddenly. I just got a call. He was already dead. You know, so I flew back for the funeral. So I wasn't. I think also I was dragging out my music school after a certain time because I didn't have enough money to pay the full tuition, so I just sort of dragged it out a bit longer.
And you didn't like had planned to go back, or
I didn't
had
make
something in mind?
No, I didn't.
Staying here?
I was just staying here, and also by that point I had gotten into a psychotherapeutic process there, and I was really dedicated to that. So it's like I wanted to stay here and do this, and both these things.
Yes.
Yeah. So.